Chapter 1. Family Tragedy in Childhood. My earliest memory of pain, of loss, was when I was just a child. I was only 8 years old, but the loss of my father, Nicola Bojaxiu, hit me like a thunderbolt, and it shook the very foundation of our family. One moment, my father was there, full of life, full of strength. Then, without warning, he was gone. It wasn't just the loss of a parent, it was the loss of something deeper, something that felt like it had been ripped away from the very core of our existence. They said his death was sudden, unexpected, even mysterious. The details surrounding it were never clear to me, and that lack of clarity only deepened the wound. A man who had been the heart of our family, gone just like that. I remember my mother, how strong she was, how she stood there trying to hold it together for us, for me and my siblings. She was a woman of faith, a woman of courage. But even the strongest of women can be broken, and I saw it in her eyes, this deep, quiet sorrow, this struggle to make sense of a world that had taken from her the man she loved. The man who was supposed to be the pillar of our home. With his death, everything changed. My mother, she had to take on the weight of the world. She had to raise us 3 children alone. The financial hardship was unbearable. Suddenly, we were no longer the family we had been. My siblings and I, we didn't fully understand the magnitude of what had happened, but we felt it. We felt the emptiness in the house, the silence that replaced the laughter of a father's presence. My mother worked tirelessly, doing everything she could to provide for us. I remember her sacrifices, her long hours, the weariness in her eyes. But she never complained, not once. She kept pushing forward, kept trying to make sure we never knew how difficult it truly was. And in that, I learned something about strength, something about resilience. My mother didn't let the world crush her. She fought back, for us, for our family, for our future. But no matter how hard she worked, the weight of that loss never went away. It stayed with us, like a shadow, following us every step of the way. It was a grief that didn't just pass with time, but one that marked us, shaped us. And even though my mother did everything she could to protect us from that grief, I saw it in her every day. I saw how it made her fight harder, made her love us more deeply, made her more determined to keep going, no matter the obstacles. Losing my father so early shaped me in ways I couldn't even begin to understand at the time. It planted a seed in my heart, a seed that would later grow into my own sense of purpose, my own desire to help, to serve. But in those early years, all I could feel was the loss. All I could feel was the absence of a man who was supposed to be there, supposed to guide me, and who was taken from us far too soon. That was my beginning. A life of love, yes, but also of loss. A life that would later lead me to understand what it truly means to serve others, to give without expecting in return, because I had learned early on that sometimes all you can do is give. And so, that is what I did. But the memory of my father, of the life we had before his death, would always stay with me. It would always remind me of the strength we have to find in the face of tragedy, in the face of loss, to rise again and find purpose in the pain. Chapter 2. Lifelong Struggle with Spiritual Doubt. For all the work I did, for all the lives I touched, there was a secret I carried with me, a burden that no one knew about. It was a darkness I kept hidden, a pain I never allowed anyone to see. People looked at me. They saw me as a symbol of faith, a living example of devotion. But beneath it all, there was something else. A battle. a battle within my soul. I gave everything I had to the poor, to the suffering, to the outcasts of society. I poured my heart and soul into the work, believing that through that service, I could find God's love, God's presence. I believed that by helping others, I would draw closer to Him. But the truth is, even as I served, I felt a deep emptiness inside. I felt abandoned, as though God had turned His back on me. It started quietly, like a whisper in the back of my mind, but over the years, that whisper grew louder. It became a constant ache, a loneliness that I couldn't shake. I would kneel in prayer. I would cry out to God, but I couldn't feel His presence. I couldn't hear His voice. I couldn't find the connection that I so desperately needed. It was as if He was silent, distant, and I was left alone in my faith, left alone in my service, with nothing to hold on to. I spent so many years questioning myself, questioning my purpose. Was I truly doing God's work, or was I just a woman lost in her own desire to be worthy of His love? I gave and I gave, but I never received. I felt like I was giving from an empty well, and no matter how much I gave, it was never enough to fill me. I couldn't understand why this was happening to me. How could I be so devoted? How could I be so committed, and yet feel this constant sense of spiritual emptiness? I would pray, I would fast, I would do everything that was expected of me, but nothing changed. And it hurt. It hurt deeply, in a way that words can't fully capture. The world saw me as a woman of unwavering faith, as a saint, but the truth is, I struggled every day. I hid my doubts, my pain, from the world. I didn't want anyone to know. I didn't want anyone to see that I, too, was human, that I, too, had my own doubts. I thought that if I showed my weakness, if I revealed the emptiness inside of me, it would make my work, my calling, seem less important, less pure. And so, I carried this burden alone. I carried it for years in silence. The loneliness, the spiritual despair, it was a private tragedy, one that only I truly understood. But even as I felt abandoned, I knew that I had to keep going. I knew that the people I served, the ones who had no voice, no hope, needed me. They needed someone who would love them without question, without hesitation. And so I gave, even when I didn't feel like I had anything left to give. In the letters I wrote, letters that were revealed after my death, I spoke of this pain, this struggle. I wrote of the emptiness I felt, the spiritual desolation that I carried with me every day. It was my secret, my burden, but it was also my reality. But despite all of it, I never stopped. I never stopped loving, I never stopped serving, because in my heart, I knew that even in my darkest moments, even when I felt most abandoned, there was still something greater than myself that I had to give. Even in the silence, I believed there was a purpose to my suffering. And so, I walked the path I had chosen, with all its pain, all its doubt, because I believed that sometimes, even in the absence of God's presence, we must still serve, still love, still give. Even when we are empty, we must pour ourselves out for the world. It was a lifelong struggle, a tragedy that no one could see, but it was also a part of my faith, a part of my journey, and one that I carried with me until the end. Chapter 3: Criticism of Her Charity Practices. When I first began my work, it was with a deep belief that I was serving God's will, that I was giving my life to something that was pure, something that would bring hope to the hopeless and dignity to the forgotten. I poured every ounce of myself into my work, into the missionaries of charity, into the homes I created for the dying, for the sick, for those who were abandoned by society. I saw these people, the ones who had been left to die alone, as the face of Christ. And I believed with all my heart that to serve them was to serve him. But I understand that not everyone saw it that way. There were critics, many critics, who looked at the homes I ran, at the conditions in which the people lived, and they saw something else. They saw suffering. They saw poor hygiene, inadequate medical care, and a lack of transparency. They saw a contradiction between the values I preached and the conditions I allowed to persist in the places where I worked. They saw a failure. I can't say their concerns were entirely without merit. There were times when resources were scarce, when our facilities couldn't provide the care that was needed. The truth is, we didn't have enough money. We didn't have enough doctors, enough nurses, enough of anything. We did the best we could with what we had. I believed and still believe that the most important thing was love. To be there for those people, to comfort them in their final days, was more important than anything else. I wasn't running hospitals. I wasn't offering a cure. I was offering compassion. I was offering dignity. But yes, I understand why some would question the way things were done. I understand that people looked at our homes and wondered why we didn't do more to alleviate suffering in a more practical way. Why we didn't provide more medical treatment. Why the conditions weren't always ideal. But I always believed that the suffering they endured was not in vain. I believed that in their suffering, they found a connection to something deeper, something divine. I saw that in their faces. I saw that in their acceptance of their fate. They had nothing left but God, and in that, they were rich beyond measure. It's true that I never shied away from speaking of the spiritual value of suffering. It's true that I believed there was something holy in it. But that doesn't mean I didn't care about the physical needs of the people I served. I cared deeply. I just had a different perspective on what care meant. I believed that sometimes the greatest healing comes not from medicine, but from love and presence. To sit with someone, to hold their hand as they died, to offer them comfort, this, I believed, was a form of healing too. As for the criticisms of how donations were used, again, I understand the concerns. It is a fact that we didn't always have the resources we needed. We didn't always have the best medical equipment or the finest doctors. But I always believed that every penny we received should go toward helping the poor, the dying, the suffering. I didn't believe in wealth, in luxury, in the trappings of the world. I lived simply, and I expected my work to reflect that. It's true that I've been criticized for not spending more on improving the conditions of our facilities, for not doing more to provide better care. But I ask you to understand that I was driven by something else. I was driven by a vision, by a belief that those people, the ones abandoned in the gutters of Calcutta, in the slums of the world, deserve to die with dignity. They didn't need luxury. They didn't need the best medical care that money could buy. They needed love. They needed someone to be with them when they had nothing left. And that's what I gave them. Of course, there were mistakes. There were things I could have done differently. There are always things one can do better, especially when you are working under such extreme conditions, with such limited resources. But I do not regret my focus on love and dignity. I do not regret my commitment to serving the poor in the way that I did. Criticism, in the end, is inevitable when you dedicate yourself to something as vast as this. But even as I faced it, even as the world questioned me, I knew in my heart that I was doing what I was called to do. There are many ways to help the poor, many ways to serve humanity, but for me, it was always about seeing Christ in the suffering, seeing him in the dying, seeing him in the ones the world had forgotten. And I believe that is what matters most. Chapter 4. Tension with her family after entering religious life. The moment I decided to give myself fully to God, to dedicate my life to his service, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. It felt like I was answering a call that had been in my heart for years, one that had always been there, waiting for me to take that step. But even as I felt the weight of my decision, as I knew it was the path I was meant to walk, I also knew it would come with a great cost. And the greatest cost, the one that pained me the most, was the separation from my family. It wasn't just leaving behind a life of comfort, of certainty. It was leaving behind the people I loved, the people who had always been there for me. My mother, my siblings, they had known me as Angie's, as their daughter, their sister. And now I was going to be something else, someone else. I was going to be a nun, a servant of God, and I knew that this choice would mean I would never be the same to them again. I had always been close to my family, especially to my mother. She had raised me with love, with care, and I had always felt her protection, her guidance. But when I made the decision to leave, to go to Calcutta and dedicate myself to the poor, to the suffering, I knew that I was tearing a piece of my heart away. My mother, I think, understood. She always had a deep faith, a quiet strength, but it didn't make it easier. For her, as for me, this was a sacrifice. I couldn't be the daughter she had raised. I couldn't be the sister who had shared in the joys and sorrows of family life. I had chosen to walk a different path, one that would take me far from them, one that would demand my time, my energy, my love, without end. And that meant the distance between us would grow. It meant that my family would become something distant, something I could only visit in memories, in brief moments when I could manage to reach out across the miles. As the years went by, that separation became more painful, not just for them, but for me as well. I missed them. I missed my mother's voice, the comfort of her presence. I missed my siblings, their laughter, their companionship. There were moments when the weight of that absence felt unbearable, but I knew that I had made my choice, and I couldn't turn back. It was a sacrifice for both sides. For my family, it was the loss of a daughter, a sister, someone who had been close to them. For me, it was the loss of the people I loved, the ones who had been my foundation. There were times when I longed to be with them again, to hear their voices, to feel the warmth of their presence. But I knew that my calling had to come first. I had chosen this life, and there was no turning back from it. And yet, even in the separation, I believe my family understood, in their own way. They saw the life I had chosen and the work I was doing, and though they missed me, I think they also respected my decision. It wasn't always easy for them, but they knew that I was doing what I felt was the right thing. I think that understanding, that quiet acceptance, was the only thing that made the distance bearable for both of us. But still, the separation was a wound. It was a wound that never fully healed. I carried it with me, in my heart, every day. And though I knew my work, my mission, was more important than any personal desire, there were times when I felt that aching loneliness. Times when I wished I could be with my family, to see them, to hold them once more. In the end, I made my peace with it. The life I had chosen was one of service, one of sacrifice, and that meant leaving behind the things I had known, including my family. But that doesn't mean it didn't hurt. It hurt deeply. The love I had for them never faded, even as the years passed, even as the miles stretched between us. And I hope that in some way they knew that. I hope that, even though I was far away, they felt the love I had for them, the gratitude I had for everything they had given me. And that, perhaps, was enough.